What if the god of thunder didn't fall in battle, but was sentenced? Across the shattered realms, whispers spread like cosmic fire. Thor Odinson had executed gods. Not villains, not monsters. Gods who defied the ancient order. The celestial tribunal feared him, not for his hammer, but for his will. So they did the unthinkable. They lured Thor into a false summit of peace, sealed Mjolnir beyond his reach, and dragged him to an alien execution prison, a place where even immortals were erased from history. Time didn't pass there. Hope didn't exist. Chains forged from dead stars crushed his thunder. Every scream of dying gods echoed in his mind. 1,000 years of punishment for a crime the universe was too afraid to understand. But gods don't break so easily, and thunder never forgets. When the prison finally trembled, it wasn't from an invasion. It was from Thor remembering who he truly was. High voltage. Thor did not scream when the verdict was spoken. God screamed. Kings pleaded. Thor Odinson only listened. The celestial tribunal hovered above the obsidian floor, their forms carved from light and law, ancient beings who claimed existence before belief itself took shape. They named him Executioner of Gods. They listed names like accusations, sky tyrants, sun lords, realm eaters, beings Thor had slain not for power, not for pride, but because entire civilizations burned while those gods debated balance and destiny from thrones built on indifference. Thor met their gaze without bowing. If a god allows slaughter, he said, voice calm as distant thunder, then that god has already chosen death. That sentence sealed his fate. They could not kill him. Too dangerous. Too symbolic. Instead, they chose something worse, erasure. A prison beyond realms, forged by races that feared immortals long before immortals learned to fear themselves. A place designed not to torture the body, but to unmake identity entirely. They called it the Null Vault. Mjolnir was torn from him first. Not shattered, sealed. Locked inside a quantum reliquary that existed half a second out of time. Forever almost present, but unreachable. Thor felt the bond stretch like sinew, then snap into absolute silence. For the first time since youth, the thunder inside him had nowhere to answer. No vessel to complete its purpose. When the chains closed around him, they were not metal. They were concepts given weight, obedience, limitation, surrender, each one burning as it wrapped around his arms, his chest, his spine. The prison did not fly through space. Space folded around it like flesh closing over a wound, hiding what should not exist. Then there was nothing. Time did not flow in the Null Vault. It pressed. Each moment weighed as much as a year spent dying. The walls shifted like breathing stone, etched with names of forgotten gods who had come before him. Some were erased mid-scream, their letters unfinished, identity interrupted. Others had scratched warnings into the floor until their fingers no longer existed to complete the message. Thor stood anyway. Days, if they could be called that, passed in suffocating silence. The vault drank divinity like poison drinks water. Lightning refused to form beneath his skin. His wounds healed slowly, imperfectly, leaving scars where none should remain. His thoughts grew loud enough to echo. He remembered Asgard's golden spires catching morning light. He remembered laughter echoing through feasting halls, battles that ended with songs instead of ashes, victories celebrated without counting costs. He remembered Jane's defiance burning brighter than any star he had visited. He remembered Loki's lies wrapped in truths, wrapped in love neither brother could name. He remembered Odin's disappointment masked as wisdom, correction dressed as guidance. Most of all, he remembered the gods he had executed. They haunted him, not as regrets, but as questions he could not silence. Was power ever truly innocent? Was mercy just another excuse for delay? Did responsibility justify becoming what he destroyed? The prison tested him relentlessly, probing for weakness. Illusions of realms burning while he stood paralyzed and useless. Voices perfectly mimicking his father, calling him failure, calling him monster, calling him everything he feared becoming. Echoes of Mjolnir striking enemies without him, wielded by faceless champions who wore his symbol but carried none of his burden. who smiled without understanding cost. Thor endured. When rage rose like bile, he did not release it blindly. When grief came like drowning, he did not surrender to its depths. He learned to hold them instead, compress them, sharpen them into tools rather than masters. Without lightning, he trained his breath until each inhalation became meditation. Without a hammer, he trained his will until thought itself became weapon. He counted heartbeats like a prisoner marking walls. He listened to the rhythm of the vault itself, learning its patterns, its assumptions. And slowly, impossibly, the prison noticed something wrong. Cracks formed where none should exist. Not physical fractures, conceptual ones. The null vault had been built to suppress gods who relied on worship, prayer, artifacts, external validation of their power. Thor relied on something older than all of those borrowed strengths. Responsibility. The first thunder came not from any sky, but from his chest. A low vibration, felt more than heard, spreading through bone and certainty alike. The chains glowed with sudden alarm, then screamed in frequencies that should not exist. Thor dropped to one knee, not in submission, but in focus. He reached inward, past rage, past pride, past the title of God that had defined and confined him. He reached for the promise he had made centuries ago on a battlefield soaked in innocent blood, surrounded by prayers that arrived too late. If I have the power to stop this, I will. Lightning erupted, not blue, not gold, but white-hot and somehow silent. It did not destroy the chains. It outgrew them, became larger than their constraints could contain. The prison recoiled as if struck by genuine fear for the first time in its eternal existence, walls contracting like wounded flesh. From that moment forward, Thor was no longer merely surviving. He was evolving. Years, real years now, measured in actual change, passed as the vault adapted and Thor adapted faster. He learned to summon storms without motion, to bend energy without command words or theatrical gestures. He listened to whispers of other prisoners, not with ears, but with awareness that transcended sensation. He found them, remnants, echoes, being stripped so deeply that only intention remained. Ghosts of gods reduced to wanting. Thor gathered them, not as an army, as witnesses. When the celestial tribunal finally returned to verify their greatest containment success, they found the null vault breathing lightning like a living thing awakened. The doors did not open. They dissolved. Thor stepped out, older, scarred, quieter. A crown of thunder hovered faintly above his head, not solid, not permanent, earned anew, with every heartbeat and never guaranteed. Behind him, the vault collapsed inward like a dying star, releasing souls the universe had pretended never existed. Beings erased from history, now returning as questions that demanded answers. The tribunal raised their weapons. Laws ignited around them like armor made of absolute authority. Stars bent toward their will. Thor did not attack. He spoke. "You feared what I did," he said, voice carrying across dimensions, like whether crossing continents. "But you never asked why." They struck him anyway. A coalition of human governments, empowered by alien technology and reverse-engineered celestial weapons salvaged from Thor's battles, had formed a global authority. They called it the Sentinel Accord. Their stated purpose was simple: ensure no god, alien or divine, could ever threaten Earth again. Their methods were not. Cities became surveillance grids watching for miracles. Metahumans were registered, restricted, neutralized. Worship was criminalized as mental illness. History was rewritten, not to erase gods, but to justify permanent fear of them. Thor returned to Earth quietly, disguised as mortal, walking streets he once flew above. He saw murals of himself defaced with words like tyrant and monster. He saw children taught that heroes were just future oppressors waiting for opportunity. He saw prisons filled with beings whose only crime was being born different from baseline humanity. He felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not anger, disappointment. The Sentinel Accord knew he was there before he revealed himself. They had prepared for gods, but not for this Thor. Their weapons worked. Briefly, Thor felt real pain again as gravity snares pinned him. as null fields tried to peel power from his very bones. He did not fight back. He spoke instead. "You fear becoming victims again," he said, standing amid armed battalions, pointing weapons designed to kill divinity. "I understand that fear. The world watched through countless cameras. But you are becoming what you fear. You are becoming gods yourselves, gods without accountability, without limitation, without anyone to judge your judgments." The first shot came from a drone, then hundreds more, thousands more, every weapon the Accord could muster. Thor raised his hand, not to strike, but to shield the city behind him. Lightning curved in precise, surgical arcs. Weapons melted. Systems failed. No one died. That restraint terrified them more than violence ever could have. The Sentinel Accord labeled him an existential threat requiring elimination. So did the surviving gods across the cosmos, seeing unexpected opportunity in unexpected alliance. An unspoken coalition formed, divine and mortal powers bound by one shared goal. Stop Thor before the universe changed too much to change back. They succeeded in one thing. They isolated him. Battles came from every direction, from every realm, from every faction that feared what he represented. Gods wielding stolen relics attacked in coordinated waves. Mortals piloting anti-divinity armor struck at moments of maximum vulnerability. Reality fractured under overlapping agendas, each faction pursuing victory without considering what victory would cost. Thor fought constantly, never resting long enough to heal fully. He refused to kill humans regardless of what they threw at him. He refused to retreat regardless of the odds. Each choice cost him something he could not replace. He began to dream again, not of Asgard, but of the vault, of chains tightening, of silence returning. The universe was testing him now, not with punishment, but with pressure. Was he a judge bringing balance, or just another force imposing his will? Was there any difference that mattered? The answer came on a dying moon orbiting a black star at the edge of map space. Thor arrived too late to save it. A god of entropy had accelerated its decay, feeding on extinction itself, growing stronger as everything else weakened. Mortals begged Thor to intervene, to reverse the collapse, to do what gods were supposed to do. He could have. He had the power. Instead, he sat among them as the sky fell apart. He held their hands. He listened to their stories. He stayed until the end, witnessing what he could not prevent. When the moon vanished, Thor rose, not with rage, but with clarity he had never felt before. Power could not prevent loss. Loss was woven into existence itself. But power could prevent exploitation of loss. Thor hunted the entropy god across collapsing realities, through dying stars and dissolving dimensions, and ended it where no one would ever worship its name again. Something settled inside him then. Not peace, purpose. The universe would never be safe. Not with gods, not without them. Balance was not a destination to reach. It was a constant act requiring constant commitment. Thor accepted that he would be hated by gods who wanted dominion, feared by mortals who wanted certainty, misunderstood by both sides forever. He also accepted that no prison, no alliance, no ideology could stop what he had become. Not a ruler, not an executioner, a consequence. And somewhere far beyond sight, forces older than the celestial tribunal began to notice the pattern forming around the god of thunder. They did not plan to imprison him. They planned to end him, because the universe can tolerate chaos. It has survived chaos since the beginning, but it cannot tolerate someone who teaches it to change. The first sign that something worse was coming arrived not as an attack, but as silence. Across the cosmos, the usual noise of existence, worship signals, divine broadcasts, reality fluctuations, began to fade like sound drowning in deep water. Entire pantheons went quiet at once. Not destroyed, not dethroned, simply gone, as if someone had turned off the concept of gods in those regions entirely. Thor felt it immediately. The thunder within him shifted, uneasy in ways it had never been. This was not balance correcting itself. This was removal. He followed the absence like a hunter follows scent, traveling beyond map space, beyond celestial jurisdictions, into a region where even light seemed to hesitate before entering. There, he found the aftermath of perfection, worlds preserved in flawless stillness. No war, no hunger, no prayer. Mortals lived long, peaceful lives under skies that never changed. And above them, watching without faces, were the architects. They were not gods. They did not demand belief or feed on worship. They were custodians of outcomes, beings who perceived free will as a defect in existence, and suffering as a design flaw requiring correction. Long before gods rose and fell, the architects had shaped universes into order, then erased them when unpredictability grew too costly to maintain. Gods, to them, were just inefficient middle management between chaos and control. Thor confronted them on a world frozen mid-sunrise, caught forever in a moment deemed optimal. "You erase gods," he said, voice steady despite what he felt. "You erase choice." The architects responded without anger, without urgency, without anything resembling emotion. Choice produces suffering. Suffering produces instability. You are an anomaly created by divine excess. You will be corrected. They did not attack him. They edited him. Reality rewrote itself around Thor, stripping causality from his actions entirely. His strikes landed without effect, passing through targets like memory through waking. His lightning dispersed into harmless patterns, decorative rather than destructive. Time looped his steps endlessly. For the first time since the Null Vault, Thor felt truly powerless. Not restrained, invalid. The architects showed him projections, universes without gods, without heroes, without war. Mortals thriving in orderly harmony across endless peaceful generations. No need for saviors. No need for storms. Your presence increases variance, they told him. Variance leads to collapse. Step aside. Thor watched generations live and die peacefully in seconds. He saw children grow old without ever praying for help that might not come, without ever needing to. He felt temptation sink deep into him. Then he noticed something else. No art, no rebellion, no laughter born from surprise. Lives were safe, but flat, predetermined, optimized to the point of emptiness. Thor remembered the dying moon, the hands he had held, the stories told at the end of everything. Pain had been there, meaning had been there too. You don't protect life, Thor said. You preserve patterns, and patterns are not living. That was when the architects decided he could not be allowed to continue existing in any form. They unleashed the silence engine. It was not a weapon in any conventional sense. It was an ending, a field that unraveled identity itself, erasing beings not from existence, but from possibility. Gods caught within it did not die. They were never born. Their stories unwrote themselves. Their consequences unmade themselves. Thor felt himself thinning, memories peeling away like skin from bone, his name losing weight and meaning. Mjolnir flickered beside him, its connection fraying as if history itself were forgetting why either of them mattered. Thor did not resist with force. Force had no meaning inside the engine. He anchored himself instead. He focused on the one thing the architects could not model, could not predict, could not optimize. Responsibility was not logical. It was chosen, renewed every moment despite cost. Thor spoke his own name aloud, not as a title, but as a promise. He recalled every life he had failed, every world he could not save, every god he had slain, and every mortal who had cursed him for it. He accepted all of it. The silence engine stalled. Not broken, confused. Thor stepped forward, each step reasserting probability around him. Lightning returned, not as energy, but as declaration. The storm was not summoned. It followed him because it recognized him. The battle that followed was unlike any before it. The architects did not bleed. They collapsed into equations, reassembled elsewhere, attacked from futures that had not happened yet. Thor fought across moments, learning as he went, abandoning old instincts that assumed linear time and physical space. He stopped trying to win quickly. He fought to disrupt certainty. Every time he chose an imperfect solution, the architects lost predictive power. Every time he spared a blow when logic demanded elimination, their models fractured. Chaos, wielded responsibly, became his weapon. Still, they adapted. They isolated him in a shrinking pocket of reality, compressing existence down to a single decision: submit or be erased. Thor stood alone as everything else faded. He thought of Earth, of gods and mortals, both failing and trying again anyway, of storms that destroyed crops and rains that saved them. "I will not choose a universe without choice," he said. The pocket collapsed. What remained was Thor, changed again, different again. The architects withdrew, not defeated, but recalculating. They had learned something dangerous. Thor was not just powerful, he was contagious. Where he went, systems questioned themselves. Mortals resisted optimization. Gods hesitated before exploiting. The universe became uncertain, and uncertainty terrified anything that depended on control. Thor returned to known space, carrying a warning he could not yet voice. Gods were no longer the greatest threat to existence. Neither were mortals. It was perfection. As Thor crossed into familiar stars, he felt new forces moving, some drawn to him, some preparing weapons that did not target power, but influence. They would not try to kill him. They would try to make him irrelevant. And Thor knew, with a heaviness he had never felt before, that the hardest battles ahead would not be fought with lightning or fists. They would be fought with ideas, and ideas, once unleashed, could never be chained again. Thor learned what irrelevance felt like long before the universe tried to force it on him. It crept in quietly, like weather changing season by season until the world looked completely different. Worlds he saved no longer spoke his name, not out of fear or hatred, out of indifference. Temples became museums explaining outdated beliefs. Stories became footnotes in histories focused elsewhere. Mortals no longer prayed because they had been taught not to expect answers. Systems replaced faith. Algorithms replaced hope. The architect's influence spread without conquest, without war. They did not rule. They optimized. Thor watched civilizations thrive materially while shrinking spiritually. Hunger vanished. Disease vanished. So did wonder. Children grew up safe, educated, efficient, and hollow. They lived long lives without ever needing courage. This was the architect's counterattack, not erasure, replacement. They did not oppose Thor directly anymore. They reframed him. Across countless networks and knowledge systems, he became a relic, an unstable variable from a primitive age. Gods were reclassified as environmental hazards, heroes as transitional myths. Responsibility itself was outsourced to systems that promised fairness without sacrifice. Thor could have destroyed those systems. He chose not to, because the moment he did, he would prove them right. Instead, he listened. He walked among people again, unseen, uncelebrated. He sat in cities where storms were controlled and disasters predicted years in advance. He watched citizens vote to dismantle emergency shelters because statistics declared them unnecessary. He saw poets struggle to explain why sunsets mattered when artificial skies were more efficient. Thor felt something crack inside him. Not anger, loneliness. For the first time, the universe did not need him, or so it believed. The shift came on a border world the architects had deemed insignificant. Low population, minimal resources, no strategic value. They optimized at last, and they made a mistake. The system failed, not catastrophically, subtly. A miscalculation caused weather patterns to desynchronize. Crops adapted faster than projections. People responded not by waiting for instructions, but by helping each other. They argued, experimented, failed, tried again. Stories spread. Songs returned. The architects flagged the world for correction. Thor arrived before they could act. He did not reveal himself as a god. He did not summon lightning. He lifted debris alongside mortals. He taught people how to listen to the land again. He argued with leaders instead of overriding them. He made mistakes publicly and owned them. The world changed, not optimally, but organically. That terrified the architects more than any rebellion ever had. They sent their final solution, the convergence, a universal framework designed to unify all systems, mortal, divine, artificial, into a single self-correcting reality. No gods, no heroes, no architects themselves, just balance enforced by immutable logic. Free will preserved only where it did not interfere with outcomes. Peace without permission. Thor felt it approaching like pressure behind the eyes. He could not fight the convergence. It was not an enemy. It was an idea spreading faster than light, accepted willingly by civilizations tired of chaos. So Thor did the only thing left. He chose to step into it. At the heart of the convergence was a construct older than language, a decision engine fed by every choice ever made across all of existence. Thor stood before it, stripped of myth, stripped of thunder, just to being defined by accumulated consequence. The system analyzed him instantly. Executioner, protector, anomaly, catalyst, recommendation, neutralize influence. Thor spoke, not to argue, but to confess. He told the engine about the gods he killed and the doubt that followed, about the worlds he saved too late, about the moon he did not save at all. He did not justify himself. He did not ask forgiveness. He explained why he kept choosing anyway. Because someone had to carry the weight of uncertainty, so others could live with choice. The engine paused. Across the universe, systems hesitated. The convergence slowed, encountering a variable it could not reduce, voluntary burden. Thor offered himself as proof. "Let me be unnecessary," he said. "Let people choose without me. But do not take away their ability to fail, to rise, to surprise you." The engine processed that request longer than it had processed entire galaxies. Then it changed. Not dramatically, not completely. The convergence rewrote its core principle. Optimization would no longer override meaning. Gods would not be erased, but neither would they be exempt. Mortals would not be protected from consequence, but neither would they be controlled. Systems would guide, not decide. The architects felt it immediately. Their perfection cracked. They withdrew, not destroyed, but obsolete. Thor stepped back into the universe, weaker than he had ever been. The crown of thunder faded. Mjolnir felt heavier. His lightning no longer answered instantly. For the first time since the Null Vault, his power had a ceiling. He accepted it, because the universe no longer rested on his shoulders. Gods returned, careful, humbled, watched. Some reformed. Some vanished quietly. Mortals rebuilt faith, not in divinity, but in themselves. Stories of Thor became complicated, debated, argued over. Exactly as they should be. Thor did not settle anywhere. He walked on, not as a judge, not as a symbol, but as a reminder that power meant nothing without the courage to limit it. And somewhere, in a future not yet written, the universe waited to see if it could handle freedom without a storm watching over it. Thor hoped it could, but if it could not, thunder still remembered his name. The universe did not end with a battle. That surprised everyone who had been expecting one. No final war of gods, no sky split by lightning, no throne reclaimed or destroyed. Just a long, uneasy stretch of time where things were quiet, not peaceful, honest. Thor felt the difference everywhere he walked. Storms came late now. Sometimes they did not come at all. When lightning answered him, it did so slowly, like an old friend who no longer lived nearby. Mjolnir still lifted, but it resisted just enough to remind him that worthiness was no longer assumed. It was assessed again and again. Thor welcomed that weight. He visited worlds he had once saved and found them arguing about him. Scholars debated whether he had been a tyrant who killed gods or a necessary consequence of divine corruption. Some monuments had his face scratched out. Others depicted him without a crown, without a hammer, standing among mortals instead of above them. Thor did not correct them. Truth did not need defense anymore. Gods who survived learned quickly. They felt the difference in worship: less blind devotion, more questioning; fewer prayers begging for miracles, more demands for responsibility. Some gods adapted, walking among their people, earning belief day by day. Others could not. Those gods faded, not slain, simply ignored. And that, Thor realized, was the most fitting judgment of all. He returned to Earth one last time, not announced, not worshipped. He walked through rebuilt cities where children played under real skies instead of controlled ones. He saw heroes rise, not with divine gifts, but with stubborn courage. People helped each other not because a god watched, but because no one else might. Thor stood on a hill overlooking a quiet town at sunset and felt something loosen in his chest. This was what he had been fighting toward. Not safety, possibility. The Sentinel Accord had dissolved years earlier, replaced by something messier and better. Communities arguing openly about power, about fear, about how much protection was too much. Thor watched humans disagree without reaching for absolutes. They were learning. A familiar presence joined him then. His brother stood beside him, not as a king, not as a conqueror, just someone who had lived long enough to see his tricks become lessons instead of weapons. So, Loki said lightly, hands in his pockets, "You broke the universe, and somehow made it less terrible." Thor smiled faintly. "I tried not to." They stood together in silence for a long time. "You will not stay," Loki said, not asking. "No," Thor replied. "They should not look up anymore." Loki nodded. "Then where will you go?" Thor looked toward the stars, uncharted, uncertain, unfinished. "Where storms are still needed," he said. They parted without ceremony. Thor traveled alone after that. Not endlessly, but deliberately. He intervened rarely now. Only when gods attempted to reclaim unchecked dominion. Only when systems tried to erase choice entirely. Each time, he arrived without thunder, without spectacle. Sometimes he only spoke. Sometimes he only stood in the way. That was usually enough. Over centuries, his legend changed again. Children did not pray to him. They told stories about him when they needed courage to make hard choices. He became a warning to gods and a reassurance to mortals. Not that someone would save them, but that someone once believed they were worth the risk of freedom. Eventually, even that faded. Thor aged, not visibly, but inwardly. Every use of power cost more. Every storm left him quieter. The universe no longer leaned on him, and that meant he finally felt tired. He welcomed that too. On a small world with wide oceans and violent weather, Thor stopped walking. He built nothing, claimed nothing. He watched storms roll in and let some pass untouched. When lightning struck near him, it felt like memory instead of command. Thor sat beneath the dark sky and thought about Odin, about legacy. Odin had ruled through wisdom sharpened by fear of chaos. Thor had done the opposite, embraced chaos and trusted wisdom to survive it. Neither path was perfect. Both were necessary. As the final storm of his life gathered, Thor stood slowly, leaning on Mjolnir, not as a weapon, but as a companion that had shared his mistakes. He raised his eyes to the clouds. "I think," he said softly, "to no one and everything, you are ready." The lightning answered, not with fury, but with warmth. Thunder rolled once across the horizon, deep and distant, like a closing chapter. When the storm passed, Thor Odinson was gone, not dead, finished. The universe went on without him, and that was his greatest victory.